Hello, everyone. Today I am going to be leading the discussion about the first module, Indigenous Education in Indian Boarding Schools. So I want to start out by talking about the first reading that we did this week over Chapter 2 from To Remain an Indian. And some of the key takeaways that I took from this were the dichotomy between asset-based perceptions of Indigenous people and deficit views. So I noticed as I was reading, I started thinking about all of the deficit terms and ideas that are so prevalent in our schools. I think that on page 2, they have the word primitive, and it got me thinking about a lot of the deficit ideas that are inherent in US curriculum. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And then what I really like about this book is it really has an asset-based view of Indigenous communities, education, and schools. So I noticed that tension right away when I was reading the chapter. Another key takeaway for me from this chapter was about the importance of out-of-school education. I think that a lot of times we place a lot of emphasis on curriculum, and we have the false idea that all learning takes place in schools. But really, this chapter talked about all of the ways that kids and adults are learning outside of traditional educational settings. And it got me thinking about how we could center those educative experiences outside of schools and embed those in our philosophies and concepts of education in the United States. When I was reading about the epistemologies that they talked about, I really appreciated how they talked about how understanding Indigenous epistemologies is a lifetime endeavor. It's not something that you can master in one reading or one course, and it's really something to be discovered and rediscovered throughout your lifetime. One thing that really stuck out to me was the tenet of "it's up to you." And this got me thinking a lot about critical education and more constructivist pedagogy and asking students, what do you think? And really coaching students through how they can make sense of their own learning and how they can use that all throughout the day. And then I also thought a lot about the significant impact about these absent voices and the attempted erasure of Indigenous sources of knowledge and contributions in our society. And I really noticed that when I was reading this chapter and the other readings and materials for this week about all of the attacks and the violences on Indigenous communities and how that impacts what we know today, what we know and what we don't know today, and all of these absent perspectives in a lot of dominant US curriculums, and thinking about how we can be more critical as teachers, as scholars about those absent perspectives and voices, and where can we look and how can we include those in our work, in our schools, in our educational systems and ideas. So I wanted to share with you something that I really have been thinking about a lot with this topic. As some of you might know, I shared this in my introduction slide, I do also teach third grade. And I have experienced a lot of tension with the curriculum and the curriculum materials that I'm often asked to teach children, particularly in social studies, the way that social studies is framed and all of the absent perspectives, the misrepresentations, the false information that is taught to students. And so this is a study that I started a few years ago along with the other teachers on my teaching team. And we started this project. It was like a participatory action research project of us teachers as we planned a unit together. And what got us started with this was we had a new literacy curriculum and we were teaching the text Peter Pan. And if you are familiar with the text or the Disney movie Peter Pan, there are quite a few deficit portrayals of Indigenous people in the book. And so this was presented as a literary classic, and we had a lot of tensions about this text. Now, at the same time when we were teaching this book, the state of Georgia adopted new social studies standards. And instead of learning about several different people in Georgia history that I was used to teaching, now we had a new unit that was called Let's Explore. And this new unit, instead of teaching about local leaders in Georgia, taught, I think it's 7 or 9 European explorers. And so these standards really present exploration, European exploration and colonization as as a neutral thing without considering some of the effects that took place. And so we really felt a lot of tension about being asked to teach about these European explorers alongside a text, Peter Pan, that both really centered Eurocentric perspectives and left out a lot of Indigenous perspectives and had a lot of false information as well. And so together we worked to create a problem-based learning unit, and our driving question was, what is the impact of absent voices in history? And so within this unit, we used a critical literacy approach with students. So we did read the text Peter Pan, but alongside that, we asked them to look for examples of bias and taught them about stereotypes and bias that they're going to see. And the same thing with the social studies standards. And we also taught them to look for what perspectives are missing, who wrote this, and how does that impact the information that is conveyed. So I did actually present this at AERA in April. So here are some of the results that came out. So not only did I mentioned that I did this with my teaching team, there's 10 of us. So we used our planning documents that we used, our lesson plans, our planning meeting notes, and then also we did some focus group interviews at the end of the unit. It was a 9-week unit. And so here are some of the findings that came through. So this disquietude with inaction, teachers felt this sort of unease about teaching these units without engaging with more criticality. And then in terms of adopting a project-based learning unit, if you're not familiar with this teaching approach, problem-based learning really is very student-centered, and students create their own solutions and their own ideas about how to address the issues presented to them. And so some teachers expressed a bit of reluctance about engaging in a unit that they were also a learner, and they didn't have all the answers, especially because all of us are products of these educational systems that have attempted to erase many of these histories and perspectives. And then a lot of teachers talked about the democratizing opportunities within PBL and really saw it as a positive approach to both combine critical literacy and engage with problematic curricula such as the ones that we were asked to teach. So as we read this book, Peter Pan, and students did a variety of different projects, and one of those was a review about the book, and some kids wrote letters to Disney or created presentations for parents or teachers, warning them about some of the problematic imagery in both the book and the movie. So here you can see these are some student work from 3rd graders and their presentations about some of the bias and stereotypes that they found in the text, both about racial representations, racism, positioning whiteness as superior, and then also gender as well, the perspectives. So here you can see some of the next steps that we came up with from this project. So this is a critical read organizer that I talked about that we used throughout it, that we did find some promise for using with students. So even with students as young as 8 and 9 years old, they were easily able to, once taught, identify examples of bias and stereotypes and be able to engage with nonfiction texts as both as evidence to find both facts and then opinions, even in a nonfiction text. So here you can see this is a pre-COVID photograph when we had guests in the school, but this is some students presenting their work during this showcase night from their project-based learning and talking about the points of view in the text they read and how that impacted the information included. So as I was doing the reading, like I mentioned, that is what I was thinking about. And it got me thinking about more ideas about how we can make these units even more authentic and include some of the ideas and the readings from this week. So I would love to hear what you think. So here are some of the discussion questions that I have embedded in the readings this week. You will see them in the assignment. So thinking about the deficit terms and ideas that are taught in many school curriculums, there's so many, from Columbus Day, the social studies unit that I mentioned, European exploration. Then next, what aspects of Indigenous education resonated with you and why? And then during the documentary that we watched here, when did you first learn about Native American boarding schools and what were your reactions? So I'm looking forward to discussing this topic with you this week and hearing your ideas. Bye-bye.